Is that Tan's mom? Let's just give them on. Oh, 5 and E. Oh, that for you.
We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. We'd like to welcome everyone to our March 22nd, 2021. Call meeting to Commissioners Tammy McCaskill, Will Jones, Rufus J. Bohr, and Justin R. Campbell. You're hereby notified that a special call commission meeting of the Palatka City Commission has been called to be held on Monday, March 2nd, 2021. Please mute your phones at Palatka City Hall, 201 North 2nd Street, Palatka, Florida, 32177. The meeting is open to the public. The meeting is called to commence at 5:30. The agenda includes, but may not be limited to, giving staff direction on a time-sensitive grant application. Please govern yourselves accordingly. We will now stand for our pledge and our invocation by Pastor Mulberry.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father, we thank you once again for this day and certainly for this opportunity to come together once again. We thank you for how you blessed us all day long. You kept us for this time and for this moment. We pray, God, for the wisdom that's necessary to guide this city into a better connection. We thank you for all that you're doing and certainly for what you're going to do. Crown the heads of these commissioners with wisdom. Give them understanding in all that's necessary in the undertaking of the task. And every personnel, God, that's represented, we pray that you will have your way. Bless us now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Hill.
Here.
Commissioner Jones. Commissioner Borum.
Present.
Commissioner McCaskill. Here. And Commissioner Campbell.
Present.
That concludes roll call.
All members are present and accounted for. We have a quorum. Next up is we've already read the notice. Public comments are now. If you're here for public comment, we'll open the floor for public comment. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes. No action will be taken on topics of discussion. Anyone wishing to speak during public comment, please dial 386-329-0100, extension 0, or you can speak through the YouTube chat, or if you're in the audience, you can fill out a yellow speaker's card and come to the podium and give your name and address. For those who are in cyberland, please do the same. Give your name and address as you speak so that you can be recognized on the record. Is there anyone here for public comment? Is there anything in the chat? Seeing nothing, we will close public comment. We will move on to our regular business and direction on our sanitary sewer lining application. Mr. Griffith, Ms. Tucker, or Mr. Holmes.
Brief introduction, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners.
Mic's not on.
1, 2, 3. Blue lights
Good.
on, Sonny.
Okay.
The reason and purpose for the emergency meeting or the special call meeting is because we've had a change of strategy or opportunities with regard to a grant application. And because of circumstances that you'll hear in just a minute, we needed commission direction and guidance before we move forward. Originally, the city had applied for a $500,000 grant from the Water Management District to continue the potable water line replacement that you undertook and began several years ago. That particular grant would not have required the city to come out of pocket with funds. It would have required additional funding, but the additional funding would have come from another grant. So the bottom line was it was basically a net zero out of pocket to the city. However, Jonathan and Mandy, because of their constant monitoring of our grant apps and their checking of the status, it became apparent last week that we were not going to score well on that grant app. So we were offered the opportunity of converting that grant to a different, or that app to a different app. This app would have been for sewer lining or lining of our sanitary sewer lines. However, that grant, the grant amount was the same, $500,000, but the project cost was significantly more, about 2.2. So even with the $385,000 that we had committed from a different source, there was still been a need to come for the city to come up with additional funding, about $1.3 million. So obviously, at that point, there was a question for the commission to determine, and that question was, do we go ahead and seek this $500,000 in funds, the grant, with the understanding that we're going to have to come up with additional money, or do we let the opportunity pass? And our deadline was actually was last week, and we managed to get them to extend it until tomorrow. So that's the reason for the special call meeting. Now, having said that, after we had initially scrambled last week, Jonathan has some news that I think gives the city other options with the same application. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to him to tell you about the project and the need for it and where the funding could come from.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Can everybody hear me okay? Sonny? And it doesn't look like the clicker is going to work, Sonny. All right, next slide, please. Like Mr. Holmes said, we submitted multiple applications. Just for clarification here, there are two different categories that the city could submit under. One is the ready category, which is limited to communities such as ourselves, and the other is the general cost share, which is open to larger communities and even the private sector. There is a funding limit in the ready category. It's a maximum of $500,000 for grant award. Next slide, please. As Mr. Holmes said, what we're talking about tonight is specifically the sanitary I&I, or inflow and infiltration project. I think you're all aware of this project or this problem. We've been talking about it for a number of years. We track the I&I on an annual basis. Simply what I&I is inflow of rainwater, stormwater, and groundwater. And along with that comes sediment. Next slide, please. Primary concerns or issues that come along with this: you get sanitary overflows, of which we have had. You have the additional cost associated with energy and chemical, and there's increased wear and tear on your lift stations and on your wastewater treatment plant. And most importantly, there are capacity concerns. We're going to slide a little bit later on. Sonny, if you could please advance. You'll see here that we track the I&I, and that's the last 3 years. Now, 2018 was a bit of an anomaly. That's when we had that issue on North 1st Street, but you'll see we're kind of somewhere in the 29 to 33%, depending on if it's a dry or wet year. Also,
well, can you put that 29 or 30% in perspective? 29% of what?
29% of what we're actually treating. So how we track the I&I is we know what we pump out to everybody, and what goes out in the water system is ultimately supposed to go into the sanitary sewer collection system. So the difference in what we pump and what we treat, or what we bill and what we treat, that's your I&I. Now that 29% number is higher than the recommended 12% threshold. When you exceed 12%, that's when they recommend an I&I study, which is what we have the $385,000 funding for. That picture there is, I believe you're all familiar with it, that is the fiscal sustainability analysis and asset management plan for the wastewater treatment plant and collection and distribution system. That was the report that was necessary for us to secure DEP SRF funding and to get or take stock of our system. It basically says, this is what you have. This is the condition of it. This is what you need to do preventative maintenance. This is what you need to do for a rate study and for capital replacement. Next slide, please. So this is pulled from the wastewater review sheet. So this is done on an annual basis. This calculation is done along with the rate calculation. And you can see for 2019, which is the last year we had full data, we had 29.1% inflow and infiltration. And you can see where we're at in capacity right now. We're approaching 41% of our permitted capacity. When a system reaches 75% capacity, and sometimes if you just get close to it, you are statutorily required to start planning, spending money for a replacement of your system. In 2016, the estimated cost of our plant was a little over 17 million. In today's dollars, that's going to be more than that. We are not in a position in the next 5 to 10 years to fund for the replacement of our plant. That's why you see some of these projects where we're taking significant plant components on an annual basis and upgrading it. But we do need to address the capacity sometime in the next 5 years. Next slide, please. My picture's blocking the suggestion there. Can we make that disappear, Sonny? Thank you. Okay. Making it difficult on me, aren't you? All right, so this is again the 3 applications. In our discussions with the Water Management District, the grantor, what they're suggesting is that we withdraw applications 1 and 2, as Mr. Holmes said, and we resubmit or transfer that application number 3 to the ready category. The implications of that are we can only receive a maximum of $500,000 in funds. We did have a fairly extensive conversation with them about the fact that that is a significant change in city match. Unfortunately, we can't reduce our city match because they're scoring the project based upon the total project cost and the benefit calculation derived from the project cost and the reduction in inflow and infiltration. Next slide, please. So again, the purpose of this presentation was to give you enough background information and a refresher to make the best decision. Simply put, the project is a need. It's something that's been on our radar. We didn't expect to have to make this type of recommendation or for you to make this decision now. It's something that's on the capital improvement plan in the next 5 years. We do have 29% I&I that is in excess of the 12% recommended. So it is something that we do need to address. So even if we don't fund this project, when it comes around for a budget cycle, we need to consider increasing the additional money that we set aside for sanitary sewer lining and manhole lining. It's something that if we can't do it in one fell swoop, we need to do a better job doing it from a preventative maintenance standpoint. And if you do decide to move forward with this project and recommend to the district the reallocation of this project to the ready category and they fund it, there's still no guarantee that they would award it. It will require approximately 1.3 in matching funds. There's a couple of ways that we get there. The first way, which is not that exciting, is funding it over a 2-year period and increasing the rates to cover that cost. That's not something we want to recommend to you. It's not something that we've planned or built the rate structure upon. You do have $150,000 that is presently in the budget that was there as a recurring debt service payment for the wastewater treatment plant digester project, of which you just received $3.5 million in grant funds. So that debt is not needed for that project. It could be reallocated to this project or to another project currently on your CIP. It's important you recognize it can be reallocated to another needed project as well. We did some calculations. We would obviously go after DEP SRF funds. Those are the most advantageous rates that the city can take advantage of. They're sub 1%, but we ran this calculation at a 1% interest over a 20-year semi-annual amortization, and it's approximately $80,000 a year. So that is, simply put, it's less than the $150,000 that's set aside. And there's a couple other grant cycles that we could prioritize this project phase and go after those over the next year or so. Those being CDBG, DEP, SRF loan/grant combination, and DEO disaster recovery may have another open cycle. That's all I've got, commissioners, and we're here for questions.
Well, there's one other thing to keep in mind. We're seeing potential growth activity applications and requests that I've not seen either as a private attorney or with my capacity in the city in the past. If you had, for instance, one project that has been approved, the 200 unit or 195 unit cottages project on St. John's Avenue, it's been approved. If it goes forward, what effect would that have on the capacity of the plant?
I didn't get a chance to run the exact numbers, Mr. Holmes, but the EPA standard is 4,000 gallons per billing cycle per home. So it's easy for us to kind of extrapolate out, that was 100 plus units, I believe.
195, almost 200.
195. We do believe that there is an impending capacity issue in the next 5 to 10 years. As Mr. Holmes said, there's some development already on the books. It's an approved PUD, correct?
It is approved PUD.
And we are getting a lot more inquiries on a recurring basis. So capacity is a concern.
But the developers also have to pay for whatever impacts they're going to have to our system as well. And we try to recoup those costs.
So in a nutshell, we had to have a decision with the requested delay by tomorrow. Staff did not want to commit the city to coming up with an additional 1.3 from any source at all without the commission making a decision about whether or not it wanted to attempt to take advantage of this $500,000 grant or not. And so we asked you guys come together and give us some direction.
Any comments from the commission at this point? Commissioner Boyle?
Well, it appears to be a seriously needed project. Either way we do it, and it sounds like the 20-year SRF option, probably slightly less than $80K a year to fund that project. You got I guess the standard 12%, and we're over, I&I is over 29%, which is fairly high. You got the infiltration and inflow, which I would think impact, it's the environmental impact and not only that, but it also put other components like the wastewater treatment facility for just processing it put in the lift stations and different things of that nature. So when we're impacting other components as it relates to that, we don't want to choke the dollars where it don't make sense, and we're going to end up paying more money out. And I think they've identified some good options, and I think we need to really strongly consider at least the SRF 20-year deal. I mean, that's my comment.
Anybody else from the commission? Mr. Jones?
I would like to know what the staff recommends first.
You had about 3 recommendations, and you kind of talked about how we budgeted out for this a little bit. Can you elaborate on that? Some of the questions that I had earlier.
Well, don't really appreciate being put on the spot like that, but I will tell you what my assessment is. It is a needed project, and I was having this conversation with someone else today. this isn't a conversation that we expected to have or to have now. If you look at our CIP, these types of improvements are a couple of years out. And I think the 385 that we secured in what would be considered a planning or a design exercise from DEO kind of affirms that. We didn't expect the city, the utility, to have to come up with a $1.3 million match. I will tell you that even though I just gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago about how we pride ourselves on a really good leveraging of our dollars, sometimes we are committing quite a bit on the application because of how successful we've been. I mean, with some of these ready $500,000 potable projects, we're putting down that we've got a couple $1 million in funds because it's secured, but it's somebody else's money that's matching their funds, and we're contractually allowed to do that. There are other projects on your CIP, and if you have specific questions about those projects, I'm here to answer those, because this will potentially delay some of those projects. And we need you to understand that as commissioners. That could mean a couple phases of potable projects. There is one project that it can't delay, and there's a significant amount of money set aside in capital outlay in the utility to fund that project. That is the granular activated carbon project at the water treatment plant, which we're under consent order with DEP to address. But you could see specifically a potable project or two get moved out on your CIP if you decided to go this route tonight. Now, with that said, it is a needed project.
Explain what CIP is for people who may be watching and don't know.
So the CIP is the capital improvement plan for the city. We publish the CIP with a 5-year window every year with the budget, and it correlates with the budget. Staff actually keeps a 20-year CIP for your utility because we're required to do that with the fiscal sustainability plan. And it identifies the needed projects and funded projects.
Commissioner Jones.
Just to the commitment of the, you said 1.3, but I saw 1.4.
You go back to the share screen,
on
son.
that slide. I think like 1.47. If I'm not mistaken. Or you can tell me what that indicates or represent.
That was actually a different application, sir. That was the application for the water treatment plant.
Okay, so let's see if I get this right. We must have 1.3 million in matching funds in order to get
500,000.
500,000.
Yes, sir.
Bad math.
I want to make sure I understood that.
Okay. Commissioner Campbell, you got anything for us?
No, sir. My question was actually already asked and answered.
Okay. And then Mr. Griffith and I, we've talked about this along with Ms. Tucker. One of the things that we did as we started doing these, one of the goals we had in doing potable water projects, if the commission remembers, one of the goals we had on the potable water projects was to basically take 14th Street and Mosley Avenue, or 15th Street, and come directly across the city so that we had proportionate allocation of resources throughout the entire city as related to potable water. And so we created initially a 10-phase approach on how we got there. So we are phase 7 or so at this point. And we've talked about, and one of the things that Mr. Griffin was alluding to was the fact that if we do this project and sanitary sewer is necessary, but if we do this project, then we delay basically our ability to continue on from 6th Street to 14th Street so that we create that symmetry, for lack of any other term, throughout the city. So there's no allegations of disproportionate allocation of resources so that we ended up in the same place. And I think what it does is it gives us a marking point. We definitely understand that there's a need as it relates to looking at our sewer lines and dealing with infiltration, because you can look at 3rd Street and see it continually sinking to see examples of what goes on. But it's not just 3rd. You can go to 6th, you can go to various areas. You can look at what we did on 3rd Street on the other side, on North 3rd Street. just to see. And so that need exists all the way around, no differently than the water lines. My concern is that if we allocate these resources at this point, the 80,000, for the sake of getting 500,000, is bad math. At the end of the day, I think staff is just in a position where they need our guidance as we move forward. I think in a perfect world, we wouldn't be sitting here seeking it, but I just think that it's not the right time for us to say, Alec, commit to 1.3 million over 20 years for the sake of getting $500,000 today, when we still have an opportunity to go look at external resources, to look at appropriation in other places where we have an opportunity to get the money. Is it critical? I absolutely agree with Commissioner Borum that it's critical. But I also think that as we begin to do stuff, that $150,000 that we have set aside as our annual contribution to replacing the wastewater treatment plant at this point is a cushion for us, because we really don't know what else is going to happen or break or do or happen during this time period. In one hurricane period, we'll find ourselves using that and more. And we found ourselves in a situation where we had 1 million gallons of water being infiltrated into our system off of one break per day. And so I just think that staff brings forth the options that would give us the best way to use our money. But again, one of the things that we talked about was having them bring the options to us. They don't want to be put into the position of making that decision for us. They just want to be able to put all the options on the table and let us make the decision. I think at the end of the day, it boils down to just basic math. You're going to commit 1.3 to get 500 when we may be able to find other ways to get 500 and be able to get more than that, depending on how we start to structure things. And there are other resources that are out there. I just don't want to be in a position where we commit to spending 1.3 million and find out that the money just isn't available to do what we need to do. And we got to reject the grant, which makes us look worse. It makes us look bad, and it creates a poor image for us, and it counts against us in the future. And so I just think this is one time where we need to sit this out. This isn't a dance for us to have at this point. And we need to really consider sitting this dance out for the purpose and regrouping and looking at other funding sources, which are available for us to try to make this happen.
Well, I got one comment on that, and that's why I wanted to make the comment on the options that was put on the table based on what I heard, that some projects it was going to be pushed back. My understanding correct? So if we wait this out, look at what that does from a standpoint of pushing other projects out from a timeline to that nature. And I need for you to speak back to that again too. And the other thing was that the other critical infrastructure that we have, the lift stations, the wastewater treatment and their failing components. I mean, if you have infiltration, among other things. So I think we need to, and again, timing was the thing here. So we only had like a short time window to try to make this decision. So when I heard about pushing projects back, in addition to the additional damage that could be caused to other critical infrastructure, you have to take all those things in consideration as well. But again, it's just my comment.
If I may, just 2 points of clarification. To the comment, I forget the word you used, Mayor, I apologize, but not sitting this out completely. If the commission decides not to go with the recommendation, we would still leave our 500,000 potable application in place. Now, staff at the district has said it's not scoring well, but in my opinion, a 1% chance of funding is better than a 0% chance. So we'd still have that in place. And like everything, we would learn from this cycle. We have had tremendous success in regards to securing funding for potable projects. It may be that now is the time to shift gears when it comes to the ready application cycle and move to a sanitary project under the next coming cycle where we could reduce the total project costs, down,
Significantly.
still where we get good benefit, but where we don't have a huge match contribution and we could still score for funding. So that's how we would move forward if that is the decision. And Commissioner Borum, when it comes to delaying those projects, the critical thing is still potable, and in two streams. It's the distribution and it's also the treatment. We have to get the GAC filter project done. We have to. We're under consent order, and we need to continue our really good progress on replacing these potable lines, as the mayor described. If we do have the ability to square off essentially where Mosley or 19th Street is with the entire city. When you look at that color-coded map that I showed you all a couple of weeks ago, that takes care of a huge chunk of those red and orange or critical lines, if you will. But we would also like to know from the commission, if you're not wanting to go with the recommendation, do you want us to prioritize this as we look at other grant cycles over the next couple of years?
I think it's necessary for it to be prioritized, and I think Commissioner Boren, maybe you kind of missed the point. For me, I wholeheartedly agree with you that this is critical. I don't think it's a question about agreeing that it's critical. I just think that, and I think Jonathan kind of said it, we got other attempts that we can make where we don't have to put as much money into the game. And I think that's the piece that's out there. When we talk about the delay portion of it, the delay comes if we decide to put this 1.3 million on the table. It takes away from other projects that we had set aside to deal with the SRF funding. And so when we acquired the SRF funding, the major purpose of it was for potable water projects. What's happened along the line is we've had other things happen which required us to address them as they came. But again, I think that potable is the most critical piece of what's out there. I think everybody's on point with their thought processes and their comments, but I just think that we just have to look at the proper funding streams and the proper times and opportunities to make this stuff happen so that we can get the most bang for our buck. And I think what staff has really brought to us is the best option if we want to go forward versus what the impacts are in totality on some of the stuff that's out there as it relates to potable. We're talking strictly off of the projects that are on the table for this particular grant cycle. But I think with everyone knowing that in the future, there's a greater opportunity to maximize the dollar. It just creates a better thought. I think more information for a stronger thought process overall.
Well,
Go ahead.
I appreciate that. I mean, that brings more clarity to me. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, you were closer to the planning portion of this whole thing with the infrastructure projects. And I'm just now coming into the fold when this got put before the commission. So, had I had that background information, I probably would have been able to make a better, more informed decision. So this was just put before at least me. I don't know if the other commissioners knew of it or what have you, the intimate details. So I can follow suit on that.
Any other comments from the commission? Yeah, I just think that, I think the biggest piece that we get out of all of this for all of us is, and the project came to all of us kind of at the same time, but I think the biggest piece is learning the funding streams. And that's the whole thing is there's so many different places where the money's at. And the best way to learn the funding streams is in Tallahassee, because every time we go, we find a different one. And I think that as we do it, what's happening along the way is Ms. Tucker and Mr. Griffith have become resident experts on funding over the course of time. And it's taken a whole bunch of no's and closed doors to get us to that point. And they've really become too good at water management funding, because water management is at the point of saying, hey, you guys have done such a great job. You're not scoring the same way on these projects. and it's changing the way we do business in a lot of ways, right? And that's what's happening. And so they've maxed out, really, when you look at few past years as to where funding has come from water management or any other resources or even appropriations from a governmental standpoint. That money wasn't flowing like that, 10 years prior. And the systems were aging, but there wasn't resources in place to really be able to do the same things, or at least the two individuals present were not in place to get the resources necessary to make the repairs. Where we find ourselves is we are now playing catch up to the system. And I think overall, there's been a great job done by both the commission and by staff as it relates to getting funding in place. And now what we're doing is we're just further educating all of us. We're all becoming educated on where the dollars are, how we get the dollars, how certain projects are scored, and also where the appropriations opportunities are outside of just going to the Senate or to the House, the state reps, because we're now seeing that there are opportunities that exist on the back end, like that 3.5 million through the agencies. And those conversations sometimes take place at a table where we're not even available to be. And so that's where this thing is really starting to grow. But I definitely appreciate the work that staff did in putting this together, and also in bringing us together to kind of fulfill the request that we recently had of making sure that everybody's sitting at the table when the decisions are made. And so I think this is great dialogue, I think, for everybody. And the more we have these conversations, the more we'll start to understand a lot of the funding streams. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll entertain a motion not to pursue the grant option at this time.
And do you want to, in your motion, are you also saying to apply for the 500,000 ready grant still?
Yes, and in the same motion, apply for the $500,000 grant.
Okay. So we've got, there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Second. Motion on the floor and second. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
Question.
Questions called. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We already voted. Let's count Commissioner Campbell as an aye. His Wi-Fi is a little slow today. So we've got the vote in place. That puts us in a position, I think, financially where we are going to have stronger opportunities that continue from here. And so that's it as far as that item's concerned. At this point, any comments from the city manager?
None further, Mr. Mayor.
Anything from the commission?
We just appreciate all the hard work you guys are doing, and thank you for the intimate details that I got regarding this here. Thank you.
Thanks for all the hard work, guys, and well thought out, well planned, and just have to seek other opportunities.
Any other comments from the commission? If we can, at some point, let's kind of put together it doesn't have to be anytime soon, but let's put together like a diagram of funding sources for water projects and sewer projects, of just kind of a quick list of places where you may be able to get money from, with like a one-liner for each agency, so that people kind of get a good flow chart of where it comes from. And I think it'll be good for everybody. All right. If there's nothing else, we're adjourned.